so much blood.
Great, now I'm hungry. Hey, it's your friendly neighborhood potato witch. Welcome to Spooky Month. Or in this case, Vampire Month. Well, maybe I should make every October Vampire Month. Fang Month? Bitey Month? That's future me's decision, but welcome anyway. Many of you may know already that I have a bit of a soft spot for vampires in media. I also have very high standards for those vampires, I guess. It takes more than just the presence of a vampire to make me enjoy something. Give me believable vampires, give me interesting vampires, give me vampires that don't sparkle. Give me vampires I can connect to in some way. Give me vampires who have more to them than just the whole "I'm dark and immortal and I feel really bad about it" shtick. So, knowing that, I'm sure you can understand why something like Vampire the Masquerade Swansong caught my interest. Before I get into the rest of the review, I want to take a moment to thank the good people at Nacon and Big Bad Wolf Studios for providing me a complimentary copy of the game in exchange for an honest review. I also want to remind you that only about 11% of people watching my videos are subscribed to the channel, so if you don't want to miss the videos I'll be making in the future, then go ahead and click that subscribe button and give this video a like at the end if you enjoyed it. Also, I will try to keep this review relatively spoiler-free, but there will be some parts where I talk about the story and characters a little, so proceed with caution if you don't want any spoilers at all. And now, on with the show. Swansong is set in Boston in 2019, so no, a certain pandemic that shall not be named doesn't actually come into things. Probably a good thing, since people locking down and quarantining would probably make it extra difficult to hunt. Anyway, the game starts off with some intense intrigue as we find out that there was meant to be an important gathering that night, political alliances getting solidified and celebrated, only it turns out that that gathering was met with some difficulties. By which I mean that people showed up and engaged in some mass slaughter, taking down the assembled vampires and any unlucky humans who happened to be that evening's snack selection. Someone dangerous knew about the gathering when they shouldn't. Someone used it as an opportunity to strike at Boston's vampires. It's time for the Camarilla to lock down and keep themselves safe, destroying documents that could implicate them in, well, being bloodthirsty creatures of the night. But we can't just sit passively by and wait for danger to go away. Swansong has the player take control of 3 vampires who are tasked with investigating what happened and striking back at the people who dared to attack the kindred in the first place. We have MM of Clan Toreador, the vampire clan known best for their attraction to all things beautiful and artistic. There's Galeb, 300-plus-year-old vampire of Clan Ventru, who are the aristocratic business people who use their immortality and resources for power and wealth. And there's Laisha, Clan Malkavian, the clan known primarily for their sometimes tenuous grasp of reality, gaining insight and wisdom from their inherent madness. MM, Galeb, and Laisha all have their individual missions to complete, but they're all working towards the same goal as assigned by the city's prince, Hazel Iverson: protect the Camarilla and find out who dared attack them. So, I've just used a lot of terms that are familiar to those who've played or read anything to do with Vampire the Masquerade before, but there's no guarantee that everyone watching this video knows that stuff. So, quick primer, let's see how much of this setting's lore I completely mangle here. So, the Camarilla is an organization of vampires who are known as kindred. The Camarilla's main goal, aside from bogging everything down in politics and social climbing, is to enforce the Masquerade, which basically means keeping humans from knowing that vampires exist and that they influence a whole lot of human society. The head of the Camarilla in any city is the prince, which here is a gender-neutral term since female vampires absolutely can be princes. Hazel, the current prince of Boston, is a woman. Turning someone into a vampire is known as the Embrace. Vampires are each members of specific clans, connected bloodlines that gift the vampire with various abilities known as disciplines, like being able to control a person's mind and actions, perceiving and interpreting auras, moving really frickin' fast, or just straight up magic like conjuring fire. Clans are a case of like calls to like. Toreadors are more likely to be drawn to artistic mortals and embrace them into the clan, for instance. I don't think I mangled that at all, actually. If you didn't know all that stuff before going into Swansong, the game provides a very helpful codex of info that you can reference at any time, even bringing up prompts whenever a new or relevant term is mentioned in the game. You can even pause cutscenes to go read up on the lore and mechanics that have just been brought up if you need to, and that is fantastic, since not everyone who plays Swansong is gonna have this stuff in their head in advance. The Vampire the Masquerade franchise is dense with lore and history, and even those experienced with the setting might find themselves needing a refresher or encountering new info while playing. Especially because the game is set in Boston, you could have played all the VTM video games and have regular Friday night tabletop VTM sessions and not necessarily know about the specific Camarilla goings-on in a city you haven't been involved with. So it is really helpful to have that info to refer to. But if you think the info in Swansong is all surface level stuff, think again. It might give you the basics of what you need to know to understand the game, yeah, but for those who already know a lot of that stuff, there are deeper lore drops all over the damn place. For instance, the game's codex does give you the definition of diablerie, which is when one vampire drains another vampire dry, killing their victim completely while making the attacker more powerful. Diablerie is... how shall I say this? Freaking forbidden! At least most of the time. It's a taboo similar to cannibalism, and the Camarilla is not cool with that, but occasionally if a vampire has really transgressed, or the prince wants to do away with them, permission may be given to another vampire to diablerize them. Why bring this up? Oh, because while exploring the game I came across this completely missable document that talks about how the previous Prince of Boston held this big gathering, and anyone who showed up late was fair game for diablerie. Not relevant to the actual gameplay, not a plot point that comes up later, just an expansion of lore for those willing to look around. And this sort of thing happens a lot in Swansong. Easily missable documents or conversations with NPCs, adding to the depth of the story being told by connecting it to a larger world, a bigger story than just the game itself. So while people new to the VTM name can absolutely play and enjoy the story that Swansong presents, those already familiar with the franchise will find considerably more beneath the surface. One thing I want to address fairly early on is something that you really can't help but notice. The graphics. While a lot of the game does look pretty good, the location's full of atmosphere and good environmental storytelling, the character models aren't always the best. There were a few times where the mouth animations were kind of distracting, honestly. This is mostly a problem in cutscenes, where you really can get up close and personal with the characters' faces, so for the most part, when you're busy running around and doing stuff, it's not going to be that big a deal. But then you get into a dialogue-heavy cutscene, and you start noticing how weird some of the faces look, especially around the eyes and mouth. It's not terrible exactly, and I have definitely seen worse, but I've also seen better. So, playing as each of the vampires I mentioned earlier, Galeb, and Leisha, you're allowed to allot experience points to these characters and build their abilities and skills however you see fit. Doing well in each scene and accomplishing the most possible will give you more experience points for you to use. But it's this system I think is actually the game's biggest drawback. See, you can use a couple of preset archetypes to begin with pre-assigned skills and disciplines that you can expand upon as the game progresses. Or you can start with a blank slate and assign everything yourself, building the characters the way you think is best. Nothing inherently wrong with that. Only there are a whole lot of interactions and plot points that are locked behind skill requirements, and you have absolutely no idea of what sort of skill set you're gonna need before each scene. The problem becomes even worse if you try to roleplay the characters decently, building up skill sets you think they'd actually have based on their descriptions and interactions you see them have before you really get to take control of them. Galeb, for instance, seems like the sort of character who would have a fair amount of education, so it makes sense to put points into that stat. But whoops, turns out his scenes often involve a greater need for deduction than education. I pegged as someone who could talk her way into and out of situations pretty decently, as she's involved in running some nightclubs and came off as pretty well spoken. So I distributed points into things like rhetoric. But damn, I wish I hadn't, because a lot of her scenes involve needing security or hacking to really get the most out of the situation. And since you have no indication of what's needed when, you can end up mangling the experience distribution to the point where the characters can't actually accomplish too much beyond the main objectives in each mission, which limits how much experience you will get upon the scene's completion, which means fewer points that you can use to build up your character in anticipation of the next scene, which means you accomplish less. It's a cyclical problem. Now, admittedly, this mostly only hampers a person on their first playthrough of the game. Play it again, and you'll know what stats to increase to really gain the most out of the experience. Because Swansong is absolutely a game meant to be played multiple times. It might not seem like it at first, but your decisions can really influence how the game progresses, and as such, changing those decisions can lead to different outcomes. It's not always a matter of, if you don't accomplish this goal, then it's game over and you have to try again. Your successes or failures have an impact on how the story plays out, and there were a few times where I had to stop playing and think, I might not have seen this if I hadn't done something optional. For instance, there's a scene partway through the game where Leisha talks to another character about the truth behind her hallucinations and premonitions, and how the prince might be using her. The scene confirmed a couple of suspicions for me that I won't go into because it is way too deep into spoiler territory, but it occurred to me that in Leisha's previous scene, she rescued this guy from a situation where he might have fallen into enemy hands. This rescue was optional. I didn't have to do it. So if I hadn't been diligent about exploring freaking everywhere, I might not have found this character, might not have rescued him, and this scene of revelations might not have happened at all. So there's ample reason to play through the game at least once more. Build your characters more efficiently in order to find out the most in their chapters, experiment with accomplishing different things, deliberately try to fail objectives to see what happens differently later. There are a lot of possibilities for ways to experience the different facets of Swansong, and as a fan of both vampire stuff and narrative-driven video games, I can appreciate this a lot. It also shows just how much effort went into making Swansong, that there are not only so many delightful tidbits of lore hiding all over the place, but the fact that someone, likely many someones, sat down with the story and went, how would this scene play out differently if Caleb didn't do this? What would Hazel's reaction be if MM failed to do what she set out to do? Branching pathways in a story are not the easiest to manage, believe me, but Swansong does the job pretty well. I respect it for that, even if the experience system is wonky as heck and a contributing factor to needing to play the game twice to begin with. It's interesting because I expected to enjoy Swansong. I mean, I don't tend to play games I actively think I'll dislike after all, but I have to admit that I didn't expect just how much this game would end up meaning to me. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, but playing through it, I felt like I was 17 again. Full of hope and possibility and appreciating so much at life because at 17, life hadn't screwed me over in quite so many ways yet. I felt like my mind was going back to a time when just going out for a walk felt like an adventure, with possibilities around every corner. I felt like the vampire-obsessed teen I used to be, and that included having my whole life ahead of me. It was kind of like a weird sort of sense memory, I think, only the sense was entirely internal. I didn't see or smell or hear anything in particular that made me feel this way, but something about the game, the setting, the characters, I don't know, it resonated with me. It made me feel things I thought I'd forgotten how to feel.
I'm not really giving you a choice. Drink.
Okay, that scene made me feel things too, but in a different way. Look, this trio can dominate me any day. Get it? Get it? Because dominate is one of the disciplines. Seriously though, there really was just something about this game that struck the right chord with me. It helped me find a strength I didn't quite realize I still had in me. I mean, a lot of my regular viewers know that I'm disabled and deal with health crap pretty often. And my doctor is not the best doctor in the world, let's just put it that way. It's a problem to get him to do what he says he'll do, and he has a habit of overlooking very real problems that I bring to him. And I had a doctor's appointment not long after starting to play Swansong. I was nervous, I usually am. But it struck me that if Leisha can handle keeping her cool while disguising herself as multiple different branches of law enforcement, then I can stand up for myself to my doctor. If she can find the strength to handle increasing hunger while walking through the aftermath of a bloodbath, I can confront my doctor about the test results he's been ignoring. And I did. I found that strength to speak up for myself, to be in my corner if nobody else will be. I found that strength partly because Swansong, with its weird resonance with me, reminded me that I had that strength to begin with. And you can't get much more meaningful than that. So, you might be wondering at this point, why haven't I mentioned combat? Well, because there really isn't any. Oh sure, there are scenes of violence, absolutely, but they're mostly handled with QTEs and quick decision making. Do I kill this person, or feed on them? Or just make them fall asleep? You don't actually get into situations where you have to fight, so there really aren't any combat-related stats that you need to worry about. But that doesn't mean there's no conflict. Swansong takes a fight with your words, not with your fist approach to interactions. There are plenty of times during investigations, or even just seemingly casual conversations, where you can use your skills to gain more information from the person you're talking to. Sometimes you may not have those skills, as I mentioned earlier, as there's no way to know what skills will be needed before you encounter the situation in which you need them. Or you might not know that building up a certain skill is the best way to handle dealing with certain characters. But never fear, because there is sort of a way around that. Let's say you get into a conversation with someone and the option comes up to use psychology to get more info out of them. but you only have a 43% chance of success as the person you're talking to also has some skill in psychology and so can tell what you're doing and resist. Or maybe they're just particularly focused and won't fall for your trickery. In these situations, if you have at least 1 point in psychology, you can focus your own will, using your willpower points and overwhelm them until they can't resist what you're doing. You can only focus so much, and it's not always a sure thing. After all, even a 92% success rate still has an 8% chance of failure. But the option's there if you think it's worth it. Because it legitimately may not be. If you're a conservative player who prefers to hold back on using skill points as much as they can in case it's needed later, then you might honestly not deem it worth it to focus your will and make someone tell you what they know, figuring you might need those willpower points for more vital situations later on. And similar to other issues, you really get no warning about what might be worth it and might not be. You have to trust your own judgment and accept responsibility if it turns out you made the wrong call. Or just start the scene again, whichever. There were a couple of times during my playthrough of Swansong where I did have to restart a chapter, actually. Usually it was because I messed up, admittedly, but I didn't know that I could mess up in certain ways before I, messed up. I usually rely on a game giving me what I need to progress, which includes telling me what I lack so that I know what I need to find. But Swansong gives no such info and leaves you on your own to handle things. On one hand, this is remarkably realistic, since the characters themselves are sent on missions at someone else's behest, and are not given anything beyond, here's what I want you to do, now go do it. MM doesn't get the chance to read up on how to lockpick before her next mission. Leisha doesn't know she needs the opportunity to ensure she finished that podcast on how to use rhetoric to sway people to your side. So in that way, I do have respect for the game's realism, however frustrating it might be. But yeah, it is frustration. There was one moment where I was playing as MM, and I'd used some of my hunger points to use my disciplines because I was on a mission and figured doing what I did was the quickest and surest way to accomplish that goal. Turns out that, oops, I misjudged and there was way more to the mission than that. There are some humans around that MM can feed from to replenish those hunger points, but you can only feed from humans once you've found a safe room, and you can only use each safe room once. Once you've snacked on someone, either their very, very tired body will be stashed in there, and so bringing someone else in there will, I don't know, crowd the room? It's not like some of those people don't know they were just munched on. Anyway, it's either that or there's just a straight-up corpse in there, because you lacked self-control, or good timing, and drained them completely. Corpses, even hidden, will eventually be found and raise suspicion, so it's best to not kill. Even when it's tempting. So anyway, I'd already used my 2 safe rooms, and then I encountered a situation where I needed to use those hunger points to use certain disciplines to progress, only at the end I didn't have enough points to complete my task. And I had no opportunity to replenish those points. So yeah, that might be realistic, because there's every chance you just won't be prepared for what you encounter, and you have to deal with that failure, but holy crap, is it ever annoying! You play things conservatively, you end up potentially missing important information that can help you piece together the greater mystery. You play things more liberally, and you end up wasting your limited resources on unimportant things, and end up between a rock and a dead place with no way to progress. Which sucks. Sometimes realism in games should be lauded, but sometimes realism isn't fun. So this is one aspect of Swansong I am legitimately torn over. It wasn't fun to basically dead-end myself accidentally, or risk completely failing my mission because I miscalculated. It was annoying. But I do have praise for it embracing that aspect of realism. I'm used to RPGs letting me let my guard down, and like I said earlier, making sure I have what I need to accomplish my goals. But letting my guard down was my mistake here. MM, Galeb, and Leisha are doing what they have to do because they were told to do so, and because they have the skills to succeed. The mistake is in thinking that success is inevitable. This is a game with so many branching paths, almost as many opportunities to fail as to succeed, and while the game does fail to properly educate players about some things, for the most part it says, okay, here's your scene, have at it. It emulates tabletop or LARP versions of VTM very well in that aspect, I have to admit. Technically, you can succeed at every mission, even if you don't gather every single document or ace every conversation. The game is a solid storyteller in that regard. If the player messes up, that's on the player. They could technically have succeeded. But yeah, that doesn't make the failures any less frustrating, especially in combination with the way the preset character builds don't properly prepare you for the situations ahead, and assigning points on your own without any foreknowledge of what's to come means that there is a very real chance you'll set up the characters in ways that will hamper your gameplay experience later. Yeah, realism isn't always fun. Even if the character models for Swansong do look kinda janky at times, the characters themselves are a delightfully eclectic bunch. Exactly what I'd expect from a VTM game, though honestly, Swansong went above and beyond with a few aspects of character development. You expect to have a decent mix of character types just based on clan divisions, and VTM has always been decent on paper at including representation for marginalized groups. I mean, it's hard not to have representation when you have clans like the Brujah, who are the embodiment of rebel with a cause, or Malkavians who gravitate towards those with mental illness. VTM is the sort of thing that thrives on the edges of society and can incorporate all of the people who live on those fringes, so I expected some degree of diversity either way. Queer vampires didn't surprise me, though I am still grateful for their inclusion. But there are also vampires who aren't supermodel thin. Vampires who look older than 25. A black vampire with vitiligo. A vampire with wrinkles and white hair. There's this pervading idea in media that all vampires have to be young looking and drop dead gorgeous, because if you're gonna live forever, you might as well be in the prime of your life while doing so. I get why so many people would create characters who fall into that stereotype. Living forever doesn't sound quite so appealing if you look like a grandpa. But it wouldn't make sense for a setting like Vampire the Masquerade to only and always have such stereotypical characters. If new vampires are chosen because they fit the clan archetype and will be good assets to that clan, then should it really matter if a person got to be 40 before they made enough of a name for themselves that they attracted a vampire's attention? Must all creators of beautiful art be outwardly beautiful themselves? It's an easy trap to fall into, especially when you're dealing with a video game that was based on a tabletop RPG where people make characters for themselves. And who among us hasn't felt that urge to make their character be an ideal, a beautiful and talented individual that's fun to pretend to be for a little while? So it's easy to imagine the world of darkness being populated by such characters, and to have that reflected in other associated media. But the game's lore, everything about the setting and the secret dealings in the shadows, all of it implies that characters are probably going to be as diverse in appearance and skills as any random people you encounter on the street, at the mall, wherever. It's not just the pretty people who are worthy of immortality. Even if that might tick off some people who complain that Swansong is just an SJW game that caves to woke politics, VTM has been on board with marginalized groups since its inception. By default, by its very nature. If you're looking at a Vampire the Masquerade game and getting all riled up because there are too many women, apparently some of these people missed the absolute plethora of male characters all over the place, or that it's just woke propaganda, then I get the feeling that you've missed a lot of the point of this entire franchise. But I admire that Swansong's developers really seem to have taken all that to heart. They took a setting that has ridiculously deep and convoluted lore and implications, and really treated it as it deserved to be treated. And I'm not just saying that because of how much the game meant to me personally, or because I keep getting distracted by everyone's fangs. Okay, you know how they say that when you end up with an obsession or a weird interest that sticks with you for a very long time, it's because something happened to you to spark that fascination within you? Maybe it was something showing up in your life at the right time, some meaningful encounter you had when you were much younger, just something to get the ball rolling and prompt that connection for you. So with that in mind, I'd like to know the location and identity of the vampire I must have encountered when I was 8 years old. Seriously, I have had a fascination with vampires that borders on obsession since I was a young kid. Back then, TV shows with a supernatural bent, such as The X-Files, often used to scare me to the point of needing to watch with a parent, except when the episodes involved vampires. I could watch those by myself, no problem. Watching episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I used to get this nervous-sided feeling in my stomach at seeing vampires bite people. I was perfectly primed to get into World of Darkness stuff when I discovered it in high school. Vampires have been my thing for almost as long as I can remember. Why? Hell if I know. My money may as well be on me having met some mysterious denizen of darkness when I was a kid, and it made a lasting impression on me. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Seriously, long-lost vampire friend, let's reconnect. Hit me up, let's get drinks. Anyway, back to the actual game. Swansong's narrative really kept me invested in the story, switching between the three main characters at different times to play their role in the game's progression. While you might develop a preference for playing one character more than another, I was fond of Caleb and Laisha, though it's not like I disliked MM at all. You have to spend time as each of them. The game isn't the sort to just let you play one character through the whole thing, as they all have their respective parts to play in uncovering and containing the threat to Boston's vampire population. But you do switch between their sections fairly regularly, and you don't end up sticking with one character for so long that they wear out their welcome. Though some aspects of gameplay might wear out their welcome sooner. Swansong at certain parts feels like it took some heavy inspiration from a lot of point-and-click adventure games, particularly where the player may have figured out what they need to do or where they need to go, but can't actually continue until they find one not-so-obvious item pickup that lets them unlock a cutscene so they can move the plot forward. Remember earlier when I mentioned that experience points are tied to how much you do and uncover in a character's scenes, combined with the fact that there are items and documents that are easily missable? Yeah, you might end up getting fewer experience points because you didn't look around enough to get the clue to the code that unlocks the wall safe and gives you an item you didn't actually even need but gives you cool stuff. But there's also the chance that you might end up running back and forth all over the place because you know who you're supposed to speak to next and you know where they are, but you can't unlock the door to that room because you haven't picked up a suspicious business card that suggests something odd might be going on. That exact situation didn't happen in the game, but there were a few times that were similar enough that it was easy to write a plausible analog here. For all that Swansong goes deep when it comes to world building, some of the mechanics like that just got frustrating. I mean, the world building and lack of here's a tutorial, follow all the tutorials that'll be popping up for the entire rest of the game meant that patient and diligent players could piece clues together and get a better feel for the situation just through the fantastic environmental storytelling. Other times, the lack of proper explanations can mean running around areas for what feels like freaking forever, unable to figure out what you'd need to do next, because the game didn't inform you that when you use celerity to make MM jump over this huge chasm, you have to very quickly use it again to make a further jump, or else you'll just respawn before you jump with absolutely no idea what you did wrong. The game explained celerity use, but didn't explain that you sometimes have to use it in rapid succession without any sort of prompting beyond your controller maybe rumbling. Or that advancing in the rest of that scene means doing a double celerity jump but quickly turning your camera so you can jump to a new path you didn't even see before, because why would you see it when your main opportunity to notice it has you a little preoccupied with getting to the other side of a gap before the invisible timer runs out and you just respawn back at the beginning? Swansong is a great game in many ways, but it can be obtuse as hell sometimes, and those times really took me out of my enjoyable experience and dumped me right into a frustrating experience that I needed a bit of a break from. Thankfully, those moments weren't super common, but when they showed up, goddamn were they ever annoying. On the whole though, I can easily say that my enjoyment outweighed my frustration by a massive degree. Swansong is absolutely a game I'll be going back to multiple times, to explore all the different possibilities and interactions, to see what different successes and failures will mean for the characters and the story. There's a lot to like here if you appreciate a strong narrative-driven RPG with a good supernatural mystery. It's got its flaws, not gonna lie about that, but the flaws were never so bad that I wanted to put the game down and stop playing. I wish those flaws weren't there, or at least could be mitigated somehow in future updates to the game, but I have played far worse games than this, and the good parts outshone the bad. At least for me, though I've already established that I'm probably incredibly biased. Do I recommend Swansong? Yes, with a couple of caveats. Like I said, it's a good narrative RPG with a strong story, but the strength of that story comes largely from its foundations. And despite the handy codex for those new to VTM stuff, I feel like the target audience here was those who already had experience with the franchise. They're the ones who are likely to get the most out of Swansong, even if it can be played and appreciated just fine without that background. Also, it's good to know before going into it that you're not going to be able to experience everything the first time through, and it was deliberately designed to gate things off like that in order to create a greater sense of replayability. If you enjoy the game as I did, that's fine, and it works out really well because you'll want to replay it and see what's hidden behind the different options a different character build can unlock. But if it doesn't hit quite as hard for you, then you might find yourself getting kind of annoyed by the way there's no indication of what skills and disciplines you'll need to be able to experience the best and most that any scene has to offer. If you know that in advance, then you'll be decently prepared when that situation happens. And it will. There is literally no way around that so far as I can tell. But for my part, I loved it, and whatever it was about the story and the characters that resonated so strongly with me has already done me good. For me, my experience with Swansong went beyond just playing the game. I'm not going to say it changed my life or anything, but it did affect how I felt comfortable interacting with the world, and that's not nothing. Warts and all, Swansong was a great experience for me, one that reminded me that I'm still capable of things I've thought I'd forgotten. Naturally, it won't have that effect on everyone, as is evidenced by some of the low review scores this game has been getting on Metacritic. But for all that I try to include a lot of objective info in my reviews, like info about the gameplay mechanics and what works versus what doesn't work, reviews are, at their core, one player's experience. And my experience was a positive one that didn't end once I turned the game off. Bits of it stuck with me, prompted thought and consideration, made me curious, made me feel stronger, made me feel creative again. For me, Swansong was entirely worth it. Maybe it'll be the same for you. Hey, thanks for watching. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to sit through one of my videos. If you enjoy it, go ahead and click that like button to let me know I did a decent job here. Subscribe if you haven't already, because even if my upload schedule isn't the most frequent, I have loads of ideas for videos that will be coming in the future, and you don't want to miss them. Also, let me know in the comments if you've played Swansong yet and what you thought of it. Better yet, let me know what other vampire-related games I should play. Doesn't have to be Vampire the Masquerade stuff, but just, you know, any cool game with vampires in it. I'm open to suggestions. Until next time, friends, stay safe and happy gaming.